I know it's the end of April right now, and it's one of the farthest months away from the holiday season, but I want you to go back in time with me for just a moment. Let's think about the holiday spirit. My ideal version of it is the light snow on the ground, beautiful lights strung up everywhere, and maybe little candles on the windowsills, horse-drawn carriages in the snow, and frozen lakes and rivers. Quiet nights with the sound of jingling bells in the distance. Well, and then you realize the jingling is really coming from the person standing outside of a Walmart ringing a bell with a little red pail next to them. And then I remember that this is not my ideal holiday setting. Maybe you toss in your spare coins into that bucket and the person standing there, so full of joy too, wishes you a very Merry Christmas. But is it really? Who is receiving all those donations from their collection of little red buckets? Well, today, that's exactly what we're going to look into. Hello everyone, my name is Blair, or the Illuminati, and welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to be deep diving into another organization that believes in doing good, but just like Autism Speaks, has actually caused some serious harm that's been swept under the rug. Some of it you may have heard about, but other deeply disturbing activities, perhaps not. We're talking about the Salvation Army. Many of you know them from around the holidays, the men and women standing outside the grocery stores with a bell and a little red bucket. You may be feeling in the giving mood because it's the holiday season. Drop your coins in or a few dollar bills. After all, they're a charity that helps the poor, right? Their slogan, propped up on the sign beside these bell ringers, says, "Doing the most good." But how true is that? How much good are they actually doing, and how much damage, all with your dollars? Let's dive right in and find out.
Welcome to Bible study. We're all children of Jesus.
The Salvation Army, an international movement, is an evangelical part of the Universal Christian Church. Its message is based on the Bible. Its ministry is motivated by the love of God. Its mission is to preach the gospel of Jesus Christ and to meet human needs in His name without discrimination. That's taken straight from the mission statement on the Salvation Army website. Now, I'll start off by saying I don't have a problem with an organization that has Christian values. You can believe whatever you want, or you can believe nothing at all. As long as your company or charity isn't hurting anyone or promoting a hateful message, then it probably won't be on my do not support at all costs list. But what I do have a problem with is a charity that takes these Christian values, or any values for that matter really, distorts them and weaponizes them to justify their discriminatory actions. Yeah, the whole meet human needs in His name without discrimination, not so sure on that one. More on this to come, of course. The Salvation Army was founded in 1865 by a Methodist preacher, William Booth, and his wife, Catherine. He's said to have preached his first open-air sermon outside of the Blind Beggar Tavern in London, which gave the East London Christian mission its footing, later to become the Salvation Army. The theology of the Salvation Army comes from Methodism, and while many know the Salvation Army for its thrift shops, youth groups, and shelters, the Salvation Army has churches located throughout the world in over 100 countries. Their churches are known as Salvation Army Corps, and their ministers are often referred to as officers, giving the organization a sort of military structure to their rankings. Now, I won't pretend the Salvation Army hasn't done a lot of good in the past century and a half, so let's get into that before we talk about the less than pleasant stuff about the truth. In 1885, the Salvation Army created the Family Tracing Service. This exists to restore and sustain family relationships that have lost contact with one another. It's not a missing person service necessarily, and this isn't to interfere or replace police work, but it's meant to help families that have separated due to immigration, long-lost relatives, or even hospitals that need to contact the next of kin. I think it's important this service exists, especially considering that because these aren't missing persons, police may not be able to help individuals that are looking to reunite with family members. It's a great tool, and I won't argue that. In 1917, they created National Donut Day on the first Friday of June, when over 250 Salvation Army volunteers went overseas to France to provide supplies and baked goods to American soldiers during World War I. Of course, these baked goods included donuts that were said to have been fried using soldiers' helmets, so hey, an excuse to eat delicious donuts is a plus in my book. They're also known for disaster relief. Ever since a major hurricane killed thousands of people in Galveston, Texas in September 1900, Salvation Army workers from across the country converged on Galveston to feed and shelter survivors as well as give their support. They claim to focus on 7 core services: training, food service, emotional and spiritual care, emergency communications, disaster social services, donations management, and recovery. Each one of these is admirable and much needed in a time of crisis. And of course, with $2 billion in private donations in the year 2018 alone, holiday fundraising alone reaching $400 million, the Salvation Army can certainly afford to help as many Americans as they claim. They're even ranked the 4th largest charity according to a 2009 Forbes article, behind United Way Worldwide, Feeding America, and Task Force for Global Health. Their services, from rehab to summer camp, elderly care to homeless shelters, aren't bad at all. We need more resources, if anything. More services like this. But if you only look at what they want you to see, you might not know what goes on behind closed doors. If you want to give your money to Salvation Army, I can't stop you, and I wouldn't try to. But they've got quite a few skeletons in their closet, and if I'm going to tell you in my videos about how important it is to know where you're donating your hard-earned money, then Salvation Army just has to be mentioned. So let's move on to the not-so-great aspects of the Salvation Army and all the dirt I could find.
That says, according to the Salvation Army, that I deserve death. How do you respond to that as part of your doctrine?
Well, that's a part of our belief system.
So we should die?
We have an alignment to the scriptures.
Many people are aware of this, but no one ever really says how the Salvation Army is homophobic. Well, that's what I'm here to do today. In 1998, the domestic partner law was adopted in San Francisco. It wasn't just about gay rights, but human rights. The law stated that companies that do business within the city are required to offer benefits to domestic partners of said employees. At this time, same-sex marriage had not been legalized in any state, but these laws were the first step towards acceptance. San Francisco's ordinance actually marked the first time a government entity has mandated that private employers provide benefit plan coverage for domestic partners. Again, the reason why this is so important, aside from, the basic human rights part, is that it gives a domestic partner medical insurance, disability insurance, life insurance, family leave, bereavement leave, parental leave, rights that a married couple doesn't have to fight for. This was truly a huge step. And then, following this news, the Salvation Army pretty much said, yeah, no thanks. Rather than abide by the law and therefore get to continue to accept city funds, the Salvation Army told officials that it will scale back 3 programs for senior citizens and the homeless and no longer accept city money. Now, that decision is where I have a problem with them. Not just because of the morals, but because Salvation Army would rather refuse to help domestic partners effectively ignore city law and have less money to help the elderly and homeless than simply give health insurance benefits to a gay couple. This isn't even about marriage rights. We aren't even at that point in history yet. This is just saying, hey, domestic partners also deserve health insurance so they can survive without mountains of debt if they get sick. But the Salvation Army said, nah, we're all set. Even after negotiations for 11 months with city officials, they couldn't reach a compromise. We simply cannot agree to be in compliance of the ordinance, Richard Love, the divisional commander for the Salvation Army's Golden State Division, told the Chronicle last night. We did not view it as a matter of discrimination. We offer a full range of benefits to our employees. Love stressed that his organization is not shutting down operations in San Francisco. We're certainly not pulling out, he said. We've been here 118 years. The city contracts for $3.5 million represent only a fraction of the Salvation Army's $18 million budget for services in San Francisco. Look, if you're an organization that's all about helping people and your values are preventing you from doing that, maybe it's time to reconsider what you're all about. The city wasn't asking the Salvation Army to come out and state that they renounce their Christian values or change what they preach. Besides, what about love thy neighbor? What about not judging others? What about, hey, it doesn't matter who you are and what you've done, you're a human being and worthy of forgiveness and being treated with kindness? Many would argue those are Christian values too, but that's again just a big problem that I have with charities like this. If you care so much about being a church and sticking your message to the world, then just be a church. If you're going to help people, then don't let there be strings attached and deem some people more worthy of your help than others. Of course, this isn't all that the Salvation Army has done. In fact, there's been some dirty dealings behind closed doors, back in 2001 especially. In order to get to that, you need a little bit of a background. Under the 1996 Welfare Reform Law, the charitable choice provision allows religious organizations to compete for federal funding for certain programs without impairing the charity's religious character, as long as the charities don't use federal funds for worship or proselytizing, meaning attempting to convert someone. Under the 1964 Civil Rights Act, religious organizations have an exemption that allows them to discriminate in hiring on the basis of religion. Bush's proposal, as passed recently by the House Judiciary Committee, says religious charities cannot discriminate on the basis of race, color, national origin, sex, age, or disability, but it says nothing about sexual orientation. Effectively, what this means is that a charity can't be government funded if it were to use those funds to convert or discriminate, which is an extremely crucial point here. Can you imagine if racist, discriminatory charities were trying to convert people and were legally thriving off government funds? It would be an absolute mess, and these laws are designed to protect people against organizations like that, by, at the very least, not supporting them. I'm not saying the system isn't broken at times, but at least we've got that in place, I guess. However, this is where the Salvation Army comes into play. The Civil Rights Act says nothing about sexual orientation. The LGBTQ community didn't really exist then, and that's not to say that there weren't gay people, bisexual people, or that gender dysmorphia didn't exist, but the community was certainly not where it is today. So the Salvation Army decided that because these laws in 1964 technically didn't classify them as discriminatory, they wanted to be exempt from them. In 2001, the New York Times wrote the following: although White House officials said that the Salvation Army's request had never neared the point of being adopted by the administration, the internal Salvation Army document suggested that the matter had been moved much further. The document was written by an officer of the Salvation Army and had sent other officers. According to excerpts of the document in the Post, the group believed it had a firm commitment from the White House to issue a regulation that would override local anti-discrimination laws. In return for that, the document suggested the charity had agreed to lobby vigorously for congressional passage of legislation that would make it easier to funnel federal money into social programs administered by religious groups. Mr. Bush, president at the time, on Monday identified that bill as one of 3 that he wanted Congress to pass before the August recess. It is important that the Army's support for the White House activities occur simultaneously with efforts to achieve the Army's objectives, said the document, which went on to list one of those objectives as making sure that local governments could not impose the category of sexual orientation to the list of anti-discrimination protections. What's important to realize here is that the Salvation Army is a gigantic organization. I feel like I can hardly call them a charity at this point when they're being this sneaky, honestly. But they are tremendous, with a lot of sway and even more money. The fact that this went all the way up to the president isn't surprising, but it is disappointing. Not only were they justifying their discrimination, but knocking elbows with important people to legalize it. Vice President Dick Cheney, speaking to reporters today, expressed sympathy for the Salvation Army's perspective, saying that what the Bush administration wanted was to make sure that receiving public money for social service work did not require fundamental changes in underlying principles and organization doctrines, if you will, of the organizations that participate. It is not intended to discriminate against anybody, Mr. Cheney said. It's so frustrating for me to read this. Oh yeah, we would never want them to have to change their principles. Their values are so important that it's okay if they're leaving LGBTQ members out on the street and denying them basic services. I just don't think so. As glad as I am that this didn't go through, it's disturbing that it was even considered.
How do you know what's good for me? That's my opinion!
And of course, as if that's not bad enough, 3 years later, in 2004, the Salvation Army threatened to abandon their mission in New York when asked that job descriptions state the company's mission clearly and ask employees to describe their church affiliations. Funny, you know, you'd think that if you believe in your cause and mission so much, you'd be happy to state it clearly on job applications. But it seems like the Salvation Army was aware that their not so accepting and aggressively religious intentions may not go over as well, and this caused some tension. This reaction from a charity is not only childish but despicable. New York has over 19 million people in it, the fourth most populated state with over 80,000 homeless, and those numbers are on the rise. The Salvation Army would really leave New York, a state that's clearly in need, because we asked for some transparency? Major Klemanski, the Salvation Army's New York Division second in command, said it was only natural that the Salvation Army expects general support from its employees for its mission. Why would you go to McDonald's and tell everyone to go to Burger King, he asks. Why would anyone want to go work for the Salvation Army if they are not supportive of us? Their arrival came on the heels of a reorganization plan by Colonel Kelly that was circulated last spring. In it, Colonel Kelly urged that more Salvation Army members be recruited for jobs. The Army's Christian perspective is rarely emphasized, he said. The church and its programs are happily growing, he said. But what appears to be happening is a widening gap between the Salvation Army and the social service component. He praised a human resources executive for ordering a Muslim employee to remove various Muslim artifacts from one center. His report also questioned whether it was a good idea to have hired a human resource director for the Army's Adult Services Agency who represents an Eastern religion, apparently Buddhism or Hinduism. The clash between the group's religious and social service missions goes to the heart of President Bush's effort to make it easier for churches to obtain federal money for so-called faith-based social programs, a debate in which the Salvation Army has been central to. This is why there's a thing called a separation of church and state. If you want to be a church, awesome, be a church. If you want to be a charity, awesome, be a charity. But if you want to be a government-funded church and charity, you gotta follow rules. Not try to bend them to suit you once you have enough money. Because of this, a lawsuit was filed against the Salvation Army's Greater New York Division for proselytizing, or attempting to convert, and of course discrimination. Eventually, employees began to speak out with their horror stories and explain that things were even worse than they appeared. Several employees stated that the Salvation Army required them to sign forms revealing the churches they attended over the past 10 years, name their ministers, and agree to the Salvation Army's mission to preach the gospel of Jesus Christ. I'm sorry, but since when did it become a mandatory part of a job application to ask for those things? Several employees say they were pushed out after years of working in secular jobs when they objected. Others said the new religious focus violated the social workers' ethics code and could have a chilling effect on their work. For example, preventing them from giving condoms to people infected with HIV or forbidding abortion counseling. I was harassed to the point where I eventually resigned, said Margaret Geisman, a former human resources manager who said her superior asked for the religious and sexual orientation of her staff. As a Christian, I deeply resent the use of discriminatory employment practices in the name of Christianity. The Salvation Army, in response to that, refused to back down. They stated that they were in line with the laws governing employment practices of religious institutions and reasserted its religious mission. Unfortunately, whether because New York City needed the Salvation Army's help in the community or they didn't feel like there was enough evidence, the judge dismissed the discrimination portion of the suit in 2005. As for the other part of the suit, the New York Civil Liberties Union announced the Administration for Children's Services and the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene would set up monitoring systems to ensure that the Salvation Army does not violate church-state separation in its publicly financed dealings with clients.
Think of the decisions yet to be made, of the decisions already made. Judge them in the light of your standards. What is right and wrong?
Of course, we're not done there. To change lanes for a moment, I briefly want to go over to what happened in other countries around the same time. The Salvation Army works in well over 100 countries after all, and the USA isn't the only place where they've faced controversy. The controversy in other countries isn't quite as well known as the ones in the US, perhaps because there's not as many centers in other countries or maybe just not as much information readily available, but there's dirt there, for sure. In 2015, an article was posted in the Morning Star in Britain with the headline, "Salvation Army defends its use of forced unpaid labor." Well, how is the Salvation Army able to do this, you might ask? The Salvation Army claimed that it offers a vital service in getting long-term unemployed people back into work and seeks to support people with complex needs. Its Employment Services Director, Helen Robinson, said that the charity would be concerned if its placements were turned down. However, one man said he was told to work in a Salvation Army shop though he had a serious spinal injury, while he worked in fear of losing his benefits and going hungry. The campaigners demonstrated outside the charity's headquarters with banners displaying Bible quotes such as "The laborer is worthy of his hire," Luke 10:17, and "Woe to him that useth his neighbor's services without wages," Jeremiah 22:13. Gotta say, I think this is a fantastic way to combat the Salvation Army's rhetoric. If they're going to insist that they believe in the Bible 100%, then why wouldn't they pay their workers? It's hypocritical, and it shows that at the end of the day, they care more about their money than the people beneath them.
You're a wizard, Harry.
Now, although this isn't nearly as bad as discrimination, conversion, and lobbying the president, this next example is just plain pathetic. The Salvation Army Canada branch in 2010 apparently refused to accept Harry Potter and Twilight toys because their Christian values condemn witchcraft. Even though Harry Potter is all about friendship and triumph over evil, apparently a toy wand is too much for this charity to bear. However, that same year, although they banned Harry Potter toys, the Salvation Army in Vancouver, British Columbia, played Santa to incarcerated criminals, although they were goodie bags called sunshine bags, typically filled with peanuts, hygiene products, candies, magazines. Nothing harmful, really. I feel like this is just such a mixed message to send. They'll be strict with children in the toys they accept, but then give criminals sunshine bags? They even had to stop putting candy in the bags because the foil it was wrapped in began to be used to short out circuits and distract prison guards. This isn't me saying that the Salvation Army can't donate to criminals if they so choose, but I don't know that everyone would want to give if that's where their money was going. The Families Against Crime and Trauma FACT advocacy group spoke out against this at the time, and I can see both sides. It's a shame society writes these people off, and they should be shown goodwill. But there can be some cruel, unremorseful people in the world, and FACT sees it as undeserved rewards. Why take such a hard stance on giving candy to criminals, but not Harry Potter to children? It's just kind of sounds hypocritical to me. And of course, the third country in their international work here is what we're going to talk about. It's Australia, the worst of the international incidents by far. Now, this has been acknowledged and occurred a while back. There isn't a lot of information on the subject as it happened between the 1940s and 1970s. Thankfully, there's plenty of records and articles that Australia came out with as the story developed that are pretty recent. During those 4 decades, the 1940s through the 70s, the Salvation Army accommodated and cared for more than 30,000 children throughout Australia. While most of the children had positive experience, about 60 of those stepped forward and reported abuse. The Salvation Army said they were deeply sorry, and that seemed to settle things for the time being. From 2006, when the Salvation Army acknowledged it, up until 2013, when reportedly $15 million were paid to settle these cases privately, nothing more was said. Until in March of 2014, everything changed. The Royal Commission began an investigation to claims of child abuse, and what they found is somehow even worse than the original cases. Some of these stories are pretty graphic, so I'm gonna summarize here. But if you think this might be a little too intense for you, please feel free to skip ahead to the timestamp on the screen. Mr. Stiles came to the Salvation Army operated home in August 1971, age 12, and left in December 1972. During that time, he claimed that a Salvation Army officer known to the Commission as X-17 sexually abused him for at least 4 out of every 7 days. Many times he would drag me out of bed at 3 a.m. for allegedly making a noise, he told the Commission. Mr. Stiles described X-17 as a physically powerful man who constantly told him not to tell anyone of the incidents. He believed he had sexually abused other boys as they had been spirited away in the night in a similar manner, and he would later hear them crying. This is horrifyingly not the only case. There are multiple articles about the Salvation Army in Australia and most of the incidents occurring in the 70s, and the headlines only got worse and worse. Salvation Army Major punched 4-year-old boys in the face at Alkira Boys' Home Royal Commission hears. Some of the victims were paid up to $80,000 in compensation from the Salvation Army, which is not only a pitifully low number, insulting, but not enough to erase the damage that had been done. Hell, not even $80,000 if this is AUD, because Australian dollars aren't quite as valuable as US dollars. Apparently, some of the boys here were not only beaten, spit at, but also sexually assaulted. Boys were also punched and locked in cages at homes and were also rented out for abuse. It's all so horrific, tragic, and absolutely despicable. But what's worse is how long this was covered up. This wasn't just a few sick individuals. The environment the Salvation Army created allowed it to be this way. And you can't tell me that when this was going to be almost every single night to multiple victims and there's multiple officers being charged, that it has nothing to do with the organization. How were they preventing child abuse from happening? What measures and training were being taken back then that failed these boys so miserably? The Salvation Army responded in 2010 with a formal apology, but I hardly think $80,000 compensation really says, sorry we scarred you for life and sorry we can't take it back, you know? The fact that this ever happened is unacceptable. There may not be more the Salvation Army can do about it now, aside from ensuring that this cannot happen ever again. But it should have never happened in the first place. They didn't have proper checks and balances in place, and without a doubt, it's another reason I'm not exactly inclined to trust them. Keep in mind, we're not done with the US stuff yet, though I would say this is the worst of it. Again, I don't think anything can possibly get much worse than literally torturing, abusing, and sexually assaulting children. A year after the formal apology in 2011, a story finally was ran in the New York Times. Bill Browning and his boyfriend were homeless. To protect the identity of the boyfriend, now ex-boyfriend, Mr. Browning will not say specifically where, just that it was in southern Indiana about 20 years ago. But he is very explicit about who refused to give them shelter. The Salvation Army refused to help us, Mr. Browning recalls, unless we broke up and then left the sinful homosexual lifestyle behind. We slept on the street and they didn't help when we declined to break up at their insistence. Mr. Browning's boyfriend was wearing a Silence Equals Death AIDS pin on his jacket, which must have tipped off the Salvation Army worker. He told us we needed to be saved, Mr. Browning said. If we were willing to attend church services, he could help. We would have to break up, only one of us could stay in the shelter, and if there was room for the other, he would have to be on the opposite side of the room, and we couldn't even look at each other. This article came out in 2011, so it was back in the early 90s when this likely happened. So, hey, maybe this was like a one-time thing a while back, right? Maybe Mr. Browning was a very unfortunate victim of circumstance, but of course it's not that way. In November 2016, they supported Safe Schools, an anti-bullying program for LGBTQ students. 1 month later, they reversed their position. In 2012, a Salvation Army branch in Vermont filed a bisexual mother after she told them she was bisexual. She wrote, "Feeling shocked and deeply betrayed, I asked if I could at least show them my system for reorganizing files so they could more effectively help the clients in my absence. They agreed. Stephanie was heartbroken. She cried the entire time we went through the paperwork, continuously apologizing to me, saying that the firing me was the worst thing she's ever had to do. Captain Bill said that he was only allowed to say what the Salvation Army told him to, and since he was forbidden from revealing his own personal opinion, he would not say another word. I told them how much I appreciated the fact that they saw me as the person I am, and how grateful I was for their understanding that my sexual orientation in no way changed, diminished, or devalued or impacted the great work I did for them in any way. They promised that they would recommend me highly to future employers and would help me and my family however they could." That's great that they promised to help her family, sure, but why fire her in the first place again? If they understood that her sexual orientation didn't impact her work, then why was it a problem? The values of the Salvation Army are twisted. They're forcing the hand of employees that are perfectly capable and, again, breaking non-discriminatory laws while they do it. Even as recent as 2017, the Salvation Army has rejected trans people in their adult rehabilitation center in Brooklyn. They're not alone, however. 4 different drug centers were charged at that time. The New York City Commission on Human Rights didn't specify which violation belonged to which center, but we know that the Salvation Army Center in Brooklyn engaged in one or more of the following: refusing to accept transgender people as patients or tenants, assigning trans people rooms based on their sex assigned at birth instead of their lived gender identity, unwarranted physical examinations to determine if trans people are on hormone therapy or have had surgery, segregating transgender patients into separate rooms. Now, obviously, none of these are acceptable. It doesn't matter which one they're guilty of. Each center could be fined up to $250,000, but unfortunately, with how much Salvation Army gets in 1 year from donations and the hundreds of millions we mention they rake in every single holiday season, I doubt $250,000 will even be more than a small dent to them. Not enough to really learn a lesson anyway. Thankfully, the Commission on Human Rights was vocal and unequivocally called out the Salvation Army for doing this. In 2004, as you'll recall, New York was a bit more hesitant when the Salvation Army made its threats, but 12 years later, the tables were turned. At a time when the federal government is rolling back LGBTQ protections, New York City is doubling down on its efforts to make sure everyone is treated equally and with respect, said Deputy Commissioner of the Law Enforcement Bureau at the New York City Commission on Human Rights, Hollis V. Pitch. Following tips from the Transgender Legal Defense and Education Fund alleging discrimination against transgender patients at substance abuse centers in September 2016, the Commission began testing substance abuse centers for discriminatory practices. The Commission's testers approached more than a dozen substance abuse centers citywide to inquire whether the centers accepted transgender patients for treatment and where those patients would be housed. According to a recent survey by the National Center for Transgender Equality, of the nearly 28,000 transgender people, nearly one-third, 31%, said they had experienced mistreatment in a public accommodation in the past year, including restaurants, stores, hotels, airports, doctors' offices, and drug treatment programs. 30% of all patients reported experiencing discrimination or harassment on the job in the past year. There's still so much work to be done, but I'm glad that it's being taken seriously in this case. Those numbers are still pretty terrifying. 1/3 of transgender people facing mistreatment for no reason other than being themselves. If you're homeless or in a crisis situation, like many of the people that actually rely on the Salvation Army for help, that's one of the worst times to be turned away and left alone. Hopefully, if anyone else faces discrimination for being in the LGBTQ community, the organization will pay for it. And if that's the Salvation Army, then I hope they'll have to pay over and over and over again. The Salvation Army, as of 2019, has tried to combat homophobic claims. But when even Chick-fil-A, known for having a vocal Christian founder, stops supporting you, you know you've taken things too far. Whether or not the Salvation Army finally began responding because of losing support like this, or because they actually care, remains to be seen in my opinion. This past Christmas, bell ringers handed out cards explaining the charity's approach to the LGBTQ community, including testimonials from LGBTQ members and frequently asked questions. For years, Facebook posts, forwarded emails, and rumors have been leading some people to believe the Salvation Army does not serve members of the LGBTQ community, the cards read. These accusations are simply not true. If these cards had an apology, an explanation, and a resolve to do better, I might be on board with this. If the cards read something like, "Hey, we forgot what we're really about, helping people and not judging them. Our Christian values say how important it is to give back and be there for others, and we're sorry we weren't there for you." A real apology, not based on money. A donation to an LGBTQ center, or an alliance with one, to show real progress. Those kinds of acts make a difference. Not cards that say, "Those accusations aren't true," denying the crystal clear proof that they've been discriminatory all along. I think Ross Murray, a director of education and training at GLAAD, the Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation, says it best when he said the following: "The Salvation Army has been advertising that it will help LGBTQ people in need, which is a good step, but it can't be the only step. Their anti-LGBTQ history was multifaceted, and its path to LGBTQ acceptance is also going to have to be multifaceted." And all that said, that's where I think I'm going to end today's video. I do truly want the Salvation Army to do better considering they're a huge organization, but I'm pretty darn skeptical after researching this. It seems pretty clear to me that they aren't supporting the LGBTQ community because they care about helping everyone, but so they just don't lose money and get called out for it anymore. If you still believe the Salvation Army has enough fantastic causes to earn your hard-earned donations despite the shady behavior in the White House, the insulting financial offers to silence victims of horrible unmentionable abuse, and the long history of discrimination, well, then nothing more I can say is really going to change your mind. But before I start supporting a charity that says they're dedicated to doing the most good, I want to make sure that they're not only doing the most good, but doing no harm to my community. And that said, thank you so much for watching today's video. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. And if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and make sure to like the video. If you want more content from me, pop open the description box. You're going to find all of my social media, second channel for my puppy Casper, and the Sad Milk collaboration with all of my YouTube friends. Links for everything will be down below. Again guys, thank you so much for making it to another video. I love you so much, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!